Welcome back to Boss Bites, episode 9. And today I'm actually going to be addressing a question that I actually received from somebody who watched a recent video. And just so that I can clarify, I love when I get these sorts of questions because it allows me to address them in this sort of video format or in an article format. And I love addressing questions of real people rather than just picking and choosing topics that I cover. I want to cover things that everybody is actually interested in. So today on Boss Bites episode 9, I'm going to be talking about the idea of whether or not you can train at home with body weight only and whether or not that sort of competes with training at a gym. I recently had this question asked and I answered it on Facebook, so if you want to go check out that response there, you're more than welcome to. I'll link out to the post in question so that you can see the actual full answer, and then you can see sort of in a written format what I suggest. But the question overall was pretty much, somebody who wanted to build muscle, gain strength, doesn't want to put on a lot of weight, isn't currently exercising, and wanted to know if training at home, doing things like push-ups and pull-ups would suffice, or whether or not they need to go to a gym to actually progress. So first and foremost, let me say across the board, pretty much regardless of your goal, I do recommend that you attempt to go to a gym, especially in today's climate. You've got gyms like Planet Fitness, Crunch, all those small little strip mall gyms, which for most people is ample enough, and those are $10 a month with no sign-up fee. So if you do care about your health and your athleticism to any extent, I suggest going to a gym. Second, you definitely don't have to go to a gym if you're just looking to get in better shape. You can definitely get a better cardiovascular health. You can definitely improve the quality of your muscle, perhaps maybe even increase muscle size a little bit with body weight only exercises, and you'll probably increase strength a little bit. Things like, if you have a pull-up bar, that's one of the perfect examples of a fantastic body weight movement that you can even modify in different ways to sort of add resistance to make the movement more difficult. But for the most part, if you're just looking for like some average results and looking to get to a better, healthier place, and you can't afford to go to a gym, or you don't have a gym that's close to you, you can certainly make do with just your body weight, or if you have like some small equipment, which I'll get into next, you can definitely work out at home. But I just want to clarify why I'm still suggesting that you go to a gym, because after a certain amount of time, the amount of stress that you put yourself under via body weight exercises can actually turn into not enough if you're hoping to still progress. So I'll get back to that in a second, and then right now I just want to kind of discuss the principles that drive my opinion on this subject. So first of all, and I've talked about this multiple times, I've even written about it in articles, and I'll link out to that article in this video, this idea of progressive overload. So progressive overload is essentially a principle or theory that states in order to continually progress, you have to continually put your body under additional stress in order to drive an adaptation. So to better clarify that, let's just think about what exercise is. So exercise, when you go to a gym, when you go for a run, or pretty much any exercise you do, that's a stress that you're putting on the body. And that stress is driving some form of adaptation. And if you're talking about exercising in the gym, the adaptation is, to increase muscle size, to drop some body fat if you're, training specifically to lose weight, or, to increase strength. So that way, once you put yourself under a similar style of stress, your body is acclimated to that stress, so it's not much of a threat anymore. It's sort of like, for example, if today you did 135 on bench for 5 repetitions, you would expect that the next time that you come back and train with 135 for 5 repetitions, you'll be better prepared for that sort of stress, whether that means you're able to do more repetitions, or you're able to do 145 for 5 repetitions. Either way, your response to the original stress of exercise is to get stronger or get bigger or whatever. So it stands to reason that if you're consistently providing your body with the same stress, that once you adapt, you wouldn't adapt any further, because that's the whole point of exercising. You're trying to get stronger. You're trying to adapt to stress so that the next time that you're exposed to it, it's not as impactful on your body. So as you can see, when you go to a gym, being able to practice progressive overload is quite easy because you can manipulate things with ease. If you're bench pressing, you can do a ton of different styles of benching. You can increase reps, you can increase sets, you can increase both. At the same time, you can increase the amount of weight that you're using. The possibilities are, pretty much endless. However, if you're just working at home and you're doing things like push-ups for the same muscle groups that you would expect to be working during a bench press, being able to increase your workload progressively over time becomes far more difficult. So let me just try and equate what you would do in the gym to what you would do at home. So say you do 4 sets of 135 with the bench press. Imagine the amount of repetitions that you would need to do with body weight push-ups to achieve the same stimulus. If you're going to consider that a body weight exercise like a push-up is working the same musculature, you would expect that you would need to do a ridiculous amount of repetitions in order to match the same stimulus that you would be getting with the 135 bench press. So that's a real simple example that you can kind of see the differences between the two. Certainly you can increase strength and muscle size to a certain extent using body weight only exercises, but it just gets to a point where in order to consistently progress, it becomes more and more difficult to do. So to directly answer the question, you can definitely work out at home. There's nothing wrong with doing that. I personally am a huge proponent of exercise regardless of what it is, even if that means you don't have access to weight. However, if you're given the choice, I always recommend using a gym simply because the options available to you are so vast, and the ability to practice progressive overload is significantly easier. So I hope that sort of answers the question of whether or not you're required to work out with weights, because you definitely aren't. It's just, you shouldn't expect to see massive gains in both strength and muscle size if you're just using body weight exercises. And rather than not bog this all down, you have to think about things like improving strength. So there's recent research, especially by Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, who indicated that you can increase muscle size regardless of the weight that you're using, given that you're taking those sets close to failure. That's like what everybody is kind of assuming is what's going to drive further growth adaptation. So, but when we think about specific adaptations like being able to increase strength, the problem with body weight exercises and strength is that you're limited by, the amount of weight that your body has. So if you're trying to, be a power lifter, in addition to practicing, the actual technique and the movements that are required, you have to be able to practice those movements under heavy load to stimulate strength. For example, like you won't be a competitive powerlifter if you're just doing body weight squats at home. So, and I know that's kind of like a ridiculous comparison, but I just want to, paint a picture of the differences between what you can achieve with weight and what you're limited to if you're just using body weight. So hopefully that clarifies that little bit right there. So now that you understand, what the differences are between weightlifting and body weight exercises, I wanted to get into some different strategies. If you happen to have to work out at home, I wanted to provide you with a couple strategies to make your workouts more meaningful. So, and I'll also link out to this article below this video. One of the things that I promote on my website, especially for at-home training, is something called density. Density training is actually, in my opinion, one of the absolute best things that you can do for yourself if you happen to be training at home with little to no resistance at all. And the principle is very simple. Density training is simply a technique that allows you to practice this concept of progressive overload even if you're not using weight. So to use density training, what you want to do is pick a movement. So pick a movement like one of the most popular is probably bodyweight squats, but you could do things like push-ups, pull-ups, burpees, lunges, just about any bodyweight centric exercise. From there, you pick a unit of time. So typically this ranges anywhere from 30 to a minute, at least when you're first starting out. Once you've decided on the duration of which you're going to exercise, you take your movement, you perform it for the duration of that time that you decided on, and then you write down how many reps you got. So let's say you're doing bodyweight squats for a minute and you're able to get 50. So what you want to do is you'll take that amount, that 50 repetition amount for 1 minute, and then you'll go back and try and beat it. So you'll give yourself 2 sets of 1 minute, and set number 1 you try and get 50 reps. Set number 2 you get 55 reps. That is progressive overload. And then the next time that you come back and you repeat that workout, say you're doing squats for 1 minute, you can ensure that you're increasing the amount of repetitions per set, increasing the amount of sets that you're doing. So last time you did 2 sets of 1 minute, now you're doing 3 or 4. Or alternatively, you can also increase the duration of which your sets are. So that's basically what density training is, and it's a real simple technique to ensure that you're practicing progressive overload if you don't have any resistance available to you. Second, I suggest trying to use some things in your environment. You'd be surprised how many different things you actually have available to you that can act sort of as resistance or can make whatever you're doing at home a little bit more difficult. Personally, one of my favorite things to do is taking 5-gallon Ice Mountain water jugs, the ones with the handles, and sort of using those as heavy dumbbells. I mean, you assume that entire bottle is filled with water. It can actually get pretty heavy, and you can do things like, cleans, overhead presses, dumbbell curls, and what I love to do is actually, when I was living back home, we had a really long driveway. I like to, hold on to them and do farmer's walks around our yard, or I'd like to do holding on to them and doing lunges, or I put one of them down and put one behind my neck and sort of do like good mornings and squats with that on my back. You can find a bunch of these different things and begin to use them for your own training, just to add a little bit of resistance and make things that you're doing a little bit more difficult. From there, my next suggestion, and this is actually something that I just recently started using pretty regularly, but something that I really believe in after just like a month of using it, I would suggest getting some resistance bands. So you can get resistance bands that have handles on them. You can get resistance bands that are looped, that are actual like real tough rubber that stretches very well. The possibilities that you can use these resistance bands with is like almost endless. You can figure out a ton of different ways to use these resistance bands to increase your body weight movements. One of my favorite things, especially for pull-ups, you can use resistance bands for assistance in pull-ups, which means that you can increase the total volume that you're doing. Say you do 5 sets of 10 with body weight pull-ups, and then you throw the bands in there and you do another 5 sets, just to make it a little bit easier as you get fatigued. And alternatively, you can even wrap the band around something heavy on the ground, and you can attach it to a belt while you're doing pull-ups, which will add progressive resistance, which is actually really great. You can do things like putting it under your feet and doing bicep curls. You can wrap it around your hands and around your back and use them while you're doing push-ups to add extra resistance, which, by the way, is actually a fantastic workout. I've done it myself. I like to do it with, I actually like to use that same method at the gym, doing weights, put it on machines, put it on dumbbells, on a bench press. But, if you're just doing push-ups, that is an absolute awesome way to add a little bit of resistance while you're doing body weight exercises. So unfortunately, I can't, speak for what sort of equipment that you have, but I suggest just trying to figure out your environment and figuring out what things you have available to you that can make things just a little bit more difficult. So I think that about wraps it up for today, and I just wanted to, address this idea of whether or not you can work out at home. Just to clarify, you definitely can work out at home. There's no reason that you can't. I just want to clarify that, working out at home can become very difficult if you're not using any amount of resistance at all, if we're going to assume that progressive overload is a major driver of improving consistently. For most people, working out at home is probably just fine, especially if you have a little bit of your own equipment available to you. For instance, actually my very first client that I ever had, he had to work out at home, but he had a little bit of equipment available to him. He had an exercise ball, some dumbbells, a pull-up bar, and some TRX bands. So in that situation, if you're working out at home, the possibilities are endless as long as you have a little bit of equipment. And even if you don't have any equipment, you can still use practices like density training, which in my opinion are almost a requirement if you're not using resistance of any sort. So I hope that answers your questions. If you have any additional questions about different things that you can do at home, or if you'd like to run something by me to see if I agree with it, or if there's some way that you could potentially improve it that you haven't noticed yet, I'm more than happy to do that. Please send me a direct message through Facebook or on the website, and I'll get back to you with an answer on that as soon as possible. So I think that about wraps it up for today. If you like this video, please consider giving it a like. And if you really, really enjoyed this content, please consider commenting or alternatively subscribing to the YouTube channel and to the podcast. So that wraps it up for today, and I'll talk to you next time. Thanks.